Got everyone on mute as well.
Well, welcome. We're looking forward to today's session hearing from Patrick. Patrick O'Dowd, many of you will know, I'm sure. Patrick runs Caritas Salford, which operates across Greater Manchester. And we're really keen to hear from Patrick today about some of the work that Caritas do in fostering inclusion and in tackling marginalisation and isolation, which is an issue that I think so many of us are aware of in the communities we serve. So we're just keen to hear today about how Caritas Salford embed inclusion in their approach to all their works. So Patrick, you're very welcome, and over to you.
Thanks very much, Mark. Good morning, everybody. Thanks for the introduction, Mark, and it's a great joy to be with you all this morning. I'm joining you from Manchester. It's a bit bleak and grey outside this morning and a little bit cold, but hopefully I can warm you all up with a little bit of discussion about our outreach work across Salford Diocese, which covers Greater Manchester and Lancashire, the different areas there as well. I'm just going to share screen, and hopefully you'll be able to see the slides that I've got prepared. And I give you apology in advance that I'm not the most technical wizard in the world. So as a result, I might forget to move a slide on. So please accept my apologies in advance for any technical glitches that occur as we go through. But Mark asked me to speak a little bit this morning about inclusion and inclusivity in Caritas Salford and how we, through those approaches, seek to reach out to people who are marginalised. So I'm really grateful for this opportunity to be asked to speak to you today and to reflect on that theme, which I think is pretty much fundamental to us as Catholic organisations, if we're to be faithful to our mission as charities on behalf of or working with for the church, that of promoting inclusion and reducing isolation. As organisations, we often speak about reaching out to those who find themselves isolated and on the margins, and perhaps because they're experiencing poverty, homelessness, are from a different religious community or ethnic group, or are excluded due to disability or other particular challenges, we can respond to the circumstances of each person and a community, and we're called to live out our baptismal vocation, the values of love, respect, and justice as practiced by Jesus. We're called to imitate his love and compassion to those who are marginalised and outcast. So over the course of the next few minutes, I'd like to provide a little bit of a brief overview and a few practical examples of how we at Caritas Salford, guided by the teachings of the gospel and principles of Catholic social teaching, shape our local approaches and practical engagement to those who are excluded and isolated within the geography of Salford Diocese. I should clarify, we're not perfect, and I'll talk about some of that as we go through. And I also don't consider myself to be a theologian, an academic, or an expert in Catholic social teaching. Instead, I'm approaching this today through the privileged position of being in a leadership role within a Caritas agency, which is dedicated to putting these principles into action and offering people support during times of great need. So the foundations, I think, for inclusivity are absolutely found in the gospel as fundamentals. And the gospel teaches us that whatever you did for one of the least of these, my brothers and sisters of mine, you did for me. This passage reminds us that Jesus himself is present in those experiencing suffering, in those who are excluded and cast aside. And to live this truth is to recognise that every person, regardless of their circumstances or background, is a reflection of God's love and dignity. It's this recognition that calls us to action, to extend our hands, our hearts, and resources to all people who need them. Promoting inclusion, therefore, in my view, and I believe through our organisations, is not merely a gesture of kindness or charity, or the latest evolution in social thinking about how we build and sustain community cohesion, important as that is and critically important in this current time. But rather, as Catholic organisations, we recognise how this is a fundamental principle of Christ's teaching, and we're reminded of the innate dignity that every person created in the image and likeness of God has. Our faith teaches us that every life is precious and that we must stand in solidarity with our brothers and sisters, especially those who are vulnerable and marginalised. This solidarity compels us to see the world through the eyes of those experiencing poverty, disability, homelessness, or those forced for whatever reason to leave their homes and seek refuge in another country. This is modelled repeatedly by Jesus in the Gospels by his outreach to those who are excluded, to the prostitutes, the tax collectors, and those considered to be outcasts by society. By engaging with and uplifting those marginalised by societal norms, Jesus exemplifies a profound empathy and a call to action for us to embrace and support those on the fringes. It urges us to break down barriers of exclusion and to build bridges of understanding, compassion, and support. This call also challenges us to move beyond mere charity and to work towards systemic changes that address the root causes of inequality and suffering. So, what exactly, though, is inclusion, and how is it lived out through our faith in action in Caritas Salford today? So across Caritas Salford, and I'm sure the whole network of Catholic charities and agencies in England and Wales, we seek to create places and environments where everyone, regardless of their background, identity, or circumstances, is valued, respected, and given the opportunity to fully participate. This is more than enabling their physical presence, but also involves seeking to address barriers and ensuring equitable access to resources and opportunities. And in Caritas Salford, we've got a long history of operating various services and projects aimed at supporting people who are marginalised or disadvantaged. So some examples of practical engagement, for example, through our homeless day centres in Manchester and in Bury, we welcome around 100, 120 people each day experiencing or at risk of homelessness. There they can enjoy a community breakfast or lunch to help get essential nutrition, as well as the opportunity to wash or clean their clothes. They also have access to support provided by staff to register or deal with issues about their housing or accommodation situation. And we provide a space where other partner agencies like GPs or nursing professionals or opticians can attend, give advice or vaccinations, or give support in accessing physical or mental health advice. With both our day centres and places of accommodation for adults and young parents with their babies, often the causes of that homelessness or challenges that people are facing are rooted in underlying forms of trauma, sometimes caused by adverse experiences, whether in childhood or some other incident. So to further promote inclusion and ensure that our places are services that are safe and reflect our commitment to welcome and protection for all, we've sought to ensure that across the array of our services, we're all better informed about the origins, nature, and impact of trauma on those who have or are at risk of this, and informs the way that we work and deliver support in our projects. Not only this, but we continue to look at the growing body of evidence around what's called psychologically informed environments, which seek to ensure that settings are designed and support and enhance mental health and well-being by considering the psychological and emotional needs of individuals. This is not perfect, and many of the places that we operate from are older and not easily adapted, either due to the cost of construction or some other means. However, we're seeking to be flexible and make changes where we can to ensure that we consider the opportunities to support the whole person. An example of this is in our day centre in Manchester, where we've remodelled the entranceway, which was extraordinarily narrow, a potential place for a flashpoint of issues, by broadening it out, opening things up with glass and making sure that toughened glass to make sure that people are safe, but it's much brighter, much more welcoming feel to it. Through our Aspire education programme, we also seek to play a crucial role in promoting inclusion and integration in our communities, as well as reducing isolation and marginalisation for refugees and people seeking asylum in the UK. We have a range of projects and services to support people, and around 160 are supported as part of a free-to-access English language programme. Supporting learners across all levels, from absolute beginners to people needing qualifications to access further education, the Aspire team work in a holistic and person-centred way. Their support not only focuses on learning and being proficient in English, which I'm sure you'll agree is an essential tool for successful integration into life in the UK, but they also seek to build confidence and skills. By offering a warm, welcoming and aspirational community, the Aspire team helps refugees and asylum seekers, many people from regions like East Africa, the Middle East, Iran, Afghanistan, Hong Kong, and obviously more recently, Ukraine, to help them rebuild their lives, pursue career aspirations, and positively contribute to new communities. And I've included there a little quote from one of the people who comes to the Aspire Education program, who described how when they come to Aspire, they feel happiness and psychological comfort, which is really important to us when they're coming to visit our services, but also enables them to have the better outcome, improved academic outcome, and get them on a pathway to employment or further education. Obviously, a unique way that they do that is by fostering social connections through initiatives like food family sessions, where participants from different linguistic and cultural backgrounds come together to cook and celebrate their traditions. And I can attest personally not only to sampling the delights of various cuisines, but by building relationships through learning, there is a space for dialogue and genuine cultural interaction. This helps reduce exclusion, but also helps promote employment and healthy living and supports broader community building. Of course, there are some ongoing challenges and some tough choices about our capacity to deliver a diverse range of programmes which are inclusive. And an example of that is our outreach and befriending service to older people, which we sadly lost at the end of March 2023 due to the ending of local authority funding, which helped to support the programme. Obviously, loneliness can affect anyone, and experiences of loneliness can vary, but its effects can be profound and wide-ranging. It's therefore considered by many to be one of the largest public health challenges that we face. And in spite of the fact that over 25 million people in the UK reported feeling lonely in 2022, 7.1% of people experiencing chronic loneliness, our programme wasn't successful in renewing grant funding to support older people and the group perhaps which are most affected by the challenge. And so our capacity and ability to deliver a fully inclusive programme of support for people of all ages is stretched and very challenged. The work of promoting inclusion is not just a recent development though for Caritas Salford, and it's something that's been long in our history, thanks in large part to St Joseph's Mission to Deaf People service, which addresses the needs of the deaf community in Greater Manchester and Lancashire. By providing advocacy, facilitating access to services with BSL interpreters and delivering awareness training, the mission works to reduce isolation and increase understanding. So as part of that, there are activities such as sign masses, social events and training sessions, which help to build a supportive community for deaf individuals. The mission also creates valuable resources like video content on our website to further engage and inform the community. Thanks to the work of the mission, which celebrates 95 years of foundation this year, I have personally learned a great deal about the various barriers and forms of spiritual and social isolation that many members of the deaf community face, and how we can all be better aware of the needs of others and the marginalisation that can arise from communication barriers. I'm pleased to say that this work has now been consolidated and expanded through a particular grant to support inclusion through our new accessibility service. The service works across various Caritas projects and parishes in the diocese to foster a positive dialogue about accessibility, disability and inclusion. Recognising that accessibility is fundamental to upholding human dignity, through this project, we're seeking to ensure that no one's excluded due to unmet access needs. This has included taking steps to address barriers related to physical, mental, emotional, learning, sensory and communication needs, with a focus on finding solutions that respect and empower individuals to engage in ways that suit them best. Some of you will recall that as part of the steps from the original Disability Discrimination Act, many of our churches, our workplaces, all went through a process of undertaking assessments to look at the physical access need, and lots of money was spent on barriers and loop systems and things like that. There are two issues. First of all, in my view, there's an issue about maintaining them and making sure that they're continually accessible, because sometimes they fall into disrepair. It's important we've constantly got a mindset to ensuring that they are accessible. But then also there's other barriers as well to inclusion that are not necessarily about physical barriers, but about how we are able to support, welcome, and assist people in different ways, not due to physical barriers, but to other accessibility needs. So some of the practical outcomes of this work have led to reviewing and improving our policies and procedures, incorporating BSL English interpreters in activities and redesigning our services to provide easier access. The coordinator has also organised community events like the Reducing Disability Hate Crime and Celebration of Human Dignity events, which not only raise awareness, but also bring together diverse communities to celebrate and support one another. The project is currently focused on increasing engagement and awareness in parishes to support the way that they welcome and include those with particular access needs, and also empowering people who face different barriers to discuss and address their needs more confidently, contributing to a culture where positive accessibility strategies are integral to the work of our services and projects. Seeking to be wholly inclusive, forget to change slides at times. Seeking to be wholly inclusive is not always an easy or comfortable journey, and it challenges us to confront our own bias, question long-held assumptions, and push past the boundaries of what feels familiar. In delivering aspects of our work, there can be moments of discomfort where we might feel uncertain or even vulnerable. But I personally feel that this discomfort is a great sign that growth is happening. It's in these messy, sometimes difficult spaces that real change takes root. Acknowledging our discomfort and working through that is not always easy, but it is necessary, and a necessary step to creating truly inclusive environments where everyone feels valued. The process is not and may not be perfect, but the outcome, hopefully, a more just, equitable, and compassionate and welcoming society and church, is always worth the effort. Finally, our commitment to inclusion must extend beyond our outreach to those in need of support. It also encompasses our staff and our volunteers. While the UK has legislation that rightly protects individuals with particular characteristics, it's essential for us to embed these principles in the very culture of our workplaces and services. By fostering a culture of respect, collaboration, and innovation, we can create an environment where everyone feels valued and are able to contribute their absolute best. In the past, embracing inclusive practices may have been met with hesitation, but I've seen firsthand how doing so enables us to better reflect the diverse communities we serve, enhancing our effectiveness in fulfilling our mission. To support this, we've integrated inclusion in our induction processes. So 3 times a year, as part of the comprehensive induction package for new staff and volunteers, we host a Caritas Induction Day. This is in addition to the routine, safety, practical induction that people would naturally receive when they join an organisation. But these events offer an opportunity to explore more fully the scope of our organisation's work, understand the various strands of our services, and most importantly, connect with the motivation and principles that guide our identity as a Catholic charity. Throughout this process, we emphasise our unwavering respect for all individuals, making it clear that everyone is welcome and that everyone's contribution is greatly valued as part of our shared mission. Pope Francis also emphatically reminds us that engagement with those who are excluded is not a one-way street. By entering into authentic relationship by those considered to be giving support, that we often receive incredible gifts too. In Caritas Salford, an example of this is through the engagement work that we delivered and focused on as part of the initial contributions to the Universal Synod. And the remarks and interactions from that direct work with people about their experiences of the church, or reflecting on their lives and society, on their hardships and challenges, have been some of the greatest and most enriching perspectives I've ever been able to hear. They remind us of the need for continued humility, but also to be courageous in our outreach. Engaging with people whose experiences may be vastly different from our own who may be living in what we consider to be chaotic or dangerous circumstances may be a challenge, but it's also how we live as followers of Christ, with hearts and doors that are open to all. Today in our work as Caritas agencies, members of the Vincentian movement, all members of the Catholic community, people like St. Vincent de Paul and St. Louise de Marillac give us an example of outreach and inclusion to those most in need. They recognise people not as objects of charity, but as full participants in the life of the church, of their towns and villages, and of wider society, to be included and not isolated. We are called to continue that tradition of outreach to those experiencing forms of marginalisation and exclusion through a spirit of radical hospitality. Our charity, our Caritas, our love in action must go beyond providing material support, and it must be about creating spaces where people feel a sense of belonging and purpose without condition or expectation. As we all continue our work, I hope we can continue to be guided by the words of St. Vincent de Paul when he says that charity is a cement which binds communities to God and persons to one another. Seeing charity, love in action as an essential means of solidarity and inclusion within communities, I hope that we can continue to build up inclusive support for those in need, where they are welcomed, empowered to live with dignity, and have the chance to know the fullness of life. And as you'll see there, I forgot to skip on to the slides, so my apologies. Just a final word to say is thank you very much, Mark, to you and all the team for inviting me to be with you today. I really appreciate the opportunity to be with you and to be part of this dialogue. So thank you.
Patrick, thank you so much for that. And it's just wonderful to see a fairly extraordinary range of work that's taken place in Caritas Salford. Simultaneously deeply concerning given the level of need, but also inspiring in the level and the quality of service. And again, we've talked a little this week around the fact that we look at our Vincentian values and the charism that we have as Vincentians, and again the overlap with the core principles of Catholic social teaching as demonstrated by Caritas Salford. And it's so apparent there. Some of the themes we talk about this week are serving people experiencing the effects of poverty and respecting the dignity of the person in front of us always. And that just seems so apparent from the work that you do. I'm keen to open up to questions from the group, but as usual, I'm going to exploit my position and squeeze in first. And I just want to come back to something you said towards the end there, which just felt very, I'm sure for a lot of people here, relevant to the services they operate, which is that discomfort and messiness can be signs of real growth and change. And I'd just ask you to expand on that a little bit, because that certainly feels a familiar thing, but it's how you bring, I suppose, a culture through that to almost embrace that and see that as part of the necessary change and development of service and organisation.
Yeah, thanks, Mark, for that. I think, so I've been with Caritas Salford for 4 years now. I actually joined on as a secondment originally in 2020, and as part of that, just a few weeks before the pandemic. So the brief I had sort of went out the window as all of our lives were thrown up by the chaos that then ensued and the practical arrangements we all had to put in place for responding to the pandemic. So while I'd been involved in different aspects of social action work in the past as a volunteer, and not necessarily been in some of the day centres, particularly during the day when they were most busy, and I was kind of confronted by the disorder, the chaos that can sometimes come with people's lives and the issues that are there. And actually, I think the thing that needs to be at the heart of that is about taking a relational approach, and I'm sure that you do across in your different work, that, and see the human person for who they are. Life is not linear. It's not always straightforward. And I think underpinning that, recognizing, holding the person and their human dignity and whatever their story is really important. So a prime example actually is through the feedback we got through the Universal Synod. And it's been something that's challenged me. And Mark, you might have heard me talk about it before. In one of the feedback sessions we had with one of our homeless services, one of the key things that a gentleman put forward was about suspending judgment. We must suspend judgment because oftentimes people experiencing poverty, homelessness, a refugee, a person seeking asylum, there's so much of individual bias and background and presumption on our part that we bring to it. And that critical two-word phrase that you used about suspending judgment sort of hit me a bit like a lightning bolt, maybe it's the Holy Spirit, of giving me that nudge in the ribs to say, hold on a minute, you can be a bit judgmental at times, Patrick, so get a grip. And, you know, and I think that's been something that actually fundamentally has been discomforting in that regard, because if that person felt at times that they'd felt judged, we wouldn't want that discomfort to be there. But also discomforting to me too, of like, well, actually, you can be a bit judgmental at times. So I think, Mark, I'm not sure I'm necessarily answering your question, but that openness that came from that comment has shaped my leadership approach with the team, and how actually as part of our culture, we're trying to share that amongst the team and make sure that we're all aware of the fact that we have our own bias and we bring that to it. So how can we put that to one side? And ultimately, it is that relationship with people who use our services, to hear from them and enter into an authentic relationship with them. Does that answer your question, Mark?
No, it does, because I think it, like you say, it marks almost an internal mindset within yourself and within the wider team of breaking down maybe preconceptions that you might have had or expectations, and as you say, looking at the whole person who's in front of you. It's the same, you know, services we've got across the group will talk around people experiencing homelessness rather than homeless people, you know, the people we support rather than a client. It's that whole person. And it comes fundamentally back to the ethos of encounter, doesn't it? An openness to encounter. Thank you, Patrick.
No
We've had a question here from Mandy, asking what have been some of the common barriers you found with rolling an inclusion project out in a local community, and how did you find ways to overcome these?
Okay, so I think the first one is a general lack of awareness and understanding in the community. Again, it's about that element of our own experience might not be from a particular perspective. So again, you know, I'm not a member of the deaf community, and in engaging with them through the use of interpreters and hearing from them their experience, it was a radical eye-opening moment for me about my own lack of awareness about the communication barriers and barriers that they experience as part of their lived experience of life there. So when they go to a GP's appointment, when they go to a hospital appointment, when they go to fill out a form at you know, any one of a number of different things you need, when you need to make an emergency phone call, they're all barriers that I've not had to face before. And so I think culturally there's a general lack of awareness in communities about the nature and impact of barriers. So I think that's the first, that's one of the common issues, one of the common barriers that we've found, raising awareness to that. And I think that to solve that, we've sought to learn. We have a member of the deaf community who's part of our team, but who's got a very strong academic background in learning around barriers, and she comes and delivers for us disability awareness sessions about the different issues and challenges that are there, awareness sessions about sensory or learning needs that we, again, partly as a school governor, I was aware of to an extent, but not to their fullest extent, around things like autistic spectrum condition and moderate learning difficulties, those kind of issues. So that's been one of the barriers. Second of all, not universal by any stretch, but there is, to some extent, a little bit of resistance at times, or a little bit of mistrust about some people who perhaps might have particular cultural beliefs or histories. And I want to name it, I think we should name it, about engagement with members of the LGBT community. The church doesn't always have the best reputation for engaging with members of that community. And so there's a lot of baggage that comes with that, and mistrust on the part of people who use our services. So, you know, there is a high proportion of people who can, again, I'm drawing on homelessness experience, but who can be experiencing homelessness because they're a member of the LGBT community and they've had domestic issues. and yet they need to be welcomed and supported in our centres. And so that for me too has also been an area of great learning. So building relationships of trust with the community, I think, is really important, and that's not quick. That takes time. So the preparedness for us all to be on a journey for a long period of time, I think, is essential, and to be mindful of the fact that there's not a quick fix to this. It is about relationship. It is about living out the gospel in our lives over the long term. And then, I mean, I can continue to list them, but there's a lack of financial resources. So I spoke about barriers and things that are there. I'm aware of one instance where a disability access lift was installed into a particular church. Great, there's no level access to be able to come in if you've got a mobility issue. But that access platform that was actually outside, and so not the best location and a bit exposed to the elements, had fallen into disrepair, and the parish is in quite an inner city area and quite dilapidated itself, and many other building priorities. But if you can't worship, if you're someone who's got a mobility issue because you can't get in the steps, how welcoming is that as a church? And so I think we need to find the financial resources and the time and the human capital that's necessary to doing that. And I think as well, there are lots of broader social and economic barriers and inequities across a whole range of different reasons why people are marginalised. What I would say is one of the things that helps us is a willingness by leadership in the diocese, by the bishop, to be open to our outreach and our mission to members of the community and to be supportive in that regard. Bishop John, I wouldn't say he necessarily, I'm speaking for him here, I wouldn't say he was necessarily fluent, if that's the right word to use, on BSL, but he continues to have lessons and learns, and when he's celebrating diocesan masses, uses BSL to help ensure that members of the deaf community, for example, are included in mass fully, that they can participate. So there is a strong sense of local leadership and buy-in in our diocese, and I think for all of our organisation, we need to make sure that that's there as leaders too. There's lots of litany of other different barriers, but if Mandy wants to come back to me later, I'm happy to go through them. But hopefully that gives you a flavour of some of the different things we've experienced there, Mandy. Great, thank you.
Thanks, Patrick. We've had another question through on the chat, and it's just a reminder, you are able to unmute yourselves now if you want to ask questions directly. But we've had a question here from Margot, just asking if you could expand a little on the Aspire education programme and the level of abilities that you serve.
Yeah, no problem. So the Aspire education programme is designed to serve people of all abilities, that all entry levels for English speakers of other speakers of other languages. They get English language provision. So it can be entry level right through to those people who are seeking the relevant qualifications to be able to access university. So we have a broad spectrum of those different groups. Our programme is perhaps slightly different. So one of the challenges we have is to be able to fund it. Support, as I don't know if maybe our colleagues from JRS indicated to you the other day, support for refugees and migrants financially from grants and trusts and from central government, local government, is very stretched, and there is minimal, if any, funding to support that kind of work. So that's a challenge in itself, the ability to deliver that. But there are some programs that are offered by local authorities or by regional strategic migration partnerships that are like entry level, or they're like 20 hours worth of entry level English language provision. That's not our approach. And actually, I've referred before about the long term. Always our work is designed to be long term, because transition doesn't happen just like that. So ours follows an academic calendar. It starts just mid-September by the enrolment period and finishes in early July. And it's intended to be multiple different streams of English language provision for the long term. And we operate the classes in our other day centres or services that people can then access. There's a proper tutor in there that's what obviously enables the qualifications to be achieved. But then it's supported by a number of different volunteers, religious sisters who help us who might not be professionally qualified as ESOL teachers, but might have a background in teaching or might have a willingness and eagerness to support people with learning English. And those volunteers help with the conversational style, or sometimes there are other barriers to that too. So we adapt courses. It's quite high participation by members of the Muslim community. So we do adapt the dates and times of that during Ramadan and during various different festivals. So the program is designed to be able to be as flexible and inclusive as possible. During the recent riots, I just kind of want to make a point that we saw a dramatic drop off in the attendance at some of the classes because people were just absolutely frightened to come out and be on the streets around. Now, thankfully, there were no issues in our specific area where we deliver classes, but not far away from the office I'm speaking to you from today is the Newton Heath Hotel that has figured so much in the media coverage of the issues in Manchester. So that's a particular challenge still, and that sentiment that's there of supporting people. But again, they do deliver not just the educational provision, but that wraparound support that enables people to be to try and remove as many barriers to learn as possible, because ultimately that's the pathway to integration. I hope that helps, Margot. And there's some more information on our website as well about the program. If you want to speak to my colleague Craig Savage is the head of that program, and I'm sure he'll be happy to follow up on that with you. No problem.
Thanks, Patrick. Sister Maureen.
It's just part of my own prayers, really. I'm thinking as we get near the feast of St. Vincent, when I was listening to you, I was thinking your society loves labels. So you're gay, you're deaf, you're a Roma, you're an asylum seeker. You're not one of us. And yet Vincent and Louise, they got their values from Jesus and from the Gospels, where the only label that mattered was that you're a human being. Now, all of us here, we're involved in projects or services or whatever we're doing, or some of us may be at the older end of the spectrum. I've just put a label on us, but there you go. But what I'm thinking is that one of the great sort of ministries that we have is actually the ministry of the bus. And I always make it my business when I get on a bus to sit beside an older person or a Muslim or somebody that's outside my day-to-day experience, and just to begin some sort of a word or a conversation, because it's all of that kind of how we are as people. It breaks down the ghettoization of society, and it makes society a much more accepting, inclusive kind of a place. Yeah.
Thanks, sister. I think you've hit on a key word there around person. Mark's aware of the fact that in Caritas Salford we've adopted a language plan, which means that we don't refer to clients, service users. There were various different categories. Partly when I joined, every different service had their own language for, and aside from the fact it drove me mad, we talked about it, and we talked about the fact that we're an organisation which reflects human dignity, and they are, people are people. They're a person. They've got, they're imbued with an innate sense of dignity from God. So why don't we talk about that? So obviously, for sure, when you're putting a grant application in or when you're speaking to local authorities, to some extent, you do need to use those labels. But throughout the course of the talk, I hope you heard me try and use people a lot. And we do that in the organisation. We've been quite prolific in talking about, in terms of the migration issues. I've been quite difficult with some people about the language of small boats. We must stop small boats. Well, no, small boats is just the means by which people, small boats actually glamorizes it. These are not small boats. They're inflatable dinghies. Let's call it, if we're going to use labels, let's use the accurate one. But actually, these are people who are seeking safety and a place to have refuge in the UK. They're not a small boat. And so I think we need to be prolific in challenging all aspects of society around some of the language that they use, because that segregates and separates people. If you know me, you'll know that actually being able to keep to time or turning up on things of late is a challenge, because I seem to talk to everybody, sister. So I hopefully try and model that by that relational approach. And thankfully, there's nobody else in the room today, where sometimes I've in the past people like looking at the watch to say, come on, you need to be moving somewhere else. But I think that relational approach, it's bold, it's courageous, it's challenging. I might not always have the right language for it. Sometimes my flattened northern vowels do help kind of in being a bit folksy with chatting with people. But you know, my wife says I can't walk down the street without chatting with somebody. So, but I think we need to be bold in engaging with people relationally. It's challenging, but all of us taking that place on the bus, I think, is really important, and engaging that dialogue.
Thanks, Patrick. Do we have any further questions from across the group before we draw to a close for today? If I could just ask one thing briefly, just because you touched early on around, as well as providing the service to the people that you support and come through the doors every day, is looking to address the root causes of poverty, inequality, marginalisation, the structural causes. And just if I could ask a little bit around the approach you take to that in balance with the day-to-day frontline service.
Yeah, so our organisation has very much in the past been heavily focused on delivering practical action, and that's obviously critical. That's the forefront of our mission and helping people. But I think we also are moving into a mode now whereby we're trying to ask questions of the relevant agencies about why systemic problems exist. First of all, I recognise that as a local agency, we're probably not able to do that on our own. So the relationship with the wider Caritas and Social Action Network, of which the daughters are obviously a member, is really important to us, and where we can share that activity together. But we have been successful in appointing a new policy and influencing officer, whose role it is to try and help us amplify the vast amount of evidence that we gather and engagement we gather with people about their experiences, and help them to amplify their voices. So we're trying to take a much more practical approach to advocacy and policy and influencing and engaging with power brokers, as it were, for want of a better description, in the local area. Now, it's not necessarily our job in Caritas Salford to be banging on the door of number 10 Downing Street. It is our role, I think, though, to be gathering the practical information from our lived experience that we have in Salford, in Greater Manchester and in Lancashire, of those different challenges, and either taking them to our local authorities or combined authority, which is a bit more consolidated in Greater Manchester. I'm sure you've all seen Andy Burnham oftentimes on the radio or on the television as a great figurehead. The combined authority oversees parts of the 10 Greater Manchester areas, but he only has responsibility for certain things. We need to be directly engaged on issues there. So in partnership with another agency called Resolve Poverty, whose work is quite significant in the area and was previously known as Greater Manchester Poverty Action, we're advocating for things like the living wage with local employers, making sure that people are paying just and fair wages. We're advocating for things like the end to the 2-child benefit limit, and through CSAN we sent in some evidence to the Treasury as part of their call for information ahead of the budget. Whether that's has the impact we would want it to have, I don't know, but we'll see. And we're also then supporting the adoption of what's called the socio-economic duty, which was a factor within the 2010 Equality Act that required local authorities to consider the social impact. So not just the impact on protected characteristics, but starting to see people who are experiencing poverty within that whole area as well. So I think that that aspect is also really important, of trying to advocate for those systemic changes too. It's novel to us, it's new. We might be a bit naive or subtle at the moment in that respect, but we're trying to amplify our voice mainly locally at the moment, of engaging with local authorities to try and reach out to them and adopt some practices that we think are more strategic, that will end poverty. And I'm hopeful, because I think that there is a mood change in society at the moment around having we've talked about having a strategic approach to tackling poverty. There isn't a poverty strategy in the UK at the moment. There should be, there must be. It's an essential issue, and that's one of the other things that we're pushing for too.
Thank you so much. And so on the last point, I completely agree in terms of getting a long-term, serious, strategic approach to not just addressing, but preventing further poverty in the future. And it's really interesting you talk about the effect of local advocacy as well, because we heard last year from John Battle, who's a very, very strong believer in actually affecting significant change through local advocacy. I think his concern is that you focus too much on the parliamentary side of things and can almost oversee some of the things that can be more readily affected in your local area through working with local authorities and representatives as well. So it's great to hear the example of that. And again, as a fellow member of CSAN, where we can provide support with that, we're keen to do so. Really, Patrick, I just want to say thank you so much for your time this morning. It's been a real insight into the work that's taken place there, and we're so grateful for you taking the time to walk us through. I think hopefully there's been a few contacts made with Mandy and with Margot and some others. So please do follow up with Patrick on this. There's a lot of shared learning we can have across the wider family. But thank you for your time this morning, Patrick.
It's a pleasure, Mark. Thanks very much for everybody. I really appreciate it. And I think you finish tomorrow, don't you? So good luck for you, your last day, and best wishes.
We do, and thank you to everyone who's joined us today. Now, tomorrow we'll have a slightly extended session. I cannot promise that we'll be done within an hour tomorrow, because we have firstly we have our own Mark Currier from the team, who's going to be talking about the state of the social care sector in England, following our report published earlier this year, Searching for Consensus. It's going to talk through the state of social care, some of the problems that it's facing structurally, and where we think we can be looking to encourage the new government to address some of these problems, the long-term problems, with a system that forever seems to be on the periphery. There's a focus now on health and social care, but unsurprisingly, NHS seems to be much more in the headlines than the social care sector, and the amount of people affected by it, it's such a huge issue. So we'll be hearing from Mark tomorrow on social care. And then to mark both the end of Vincentian Values Week and, of course, the feast day of St. Vincent de Paul, the feast day itself, Sister Ellen is going to be closing the week with a reflection of the incredibly vast amount of ground that we've covered over the last several days, and a reflection on how those values shine through in the work that we've heard from, and where we, as the Daughters of Charity Services group, but also as a wider family, where we go in looking to the future and keeping these values alive in the service that we see. So we've got an extended session tomorrow, but we certainly hope to see you all there for what will be a very useful session. Personally, I feel it's been a fantastic week with the input we've had so far. So I look forward to seeing you all online at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, and we'll see you then. Thanks for joining us today.
Thank you.
Thanks very much.
Everyone. Thanks, Mark.
Thanks, Patrick.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.